Hi, Smarter News. It might be easier in America today to send someone into space than it is to unload a cargo ship. And that's what the news is telling us this week as we see some of these stories intersect today. What do I mean by that? Well, let me take you first to this space launch. I should probably say space launch because it's getting just to the edge of space. It happened yesterday. Blue Origin, the company that is owned by the founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, did its second what's called a human flight. They've done multiple tests of this particular rocket, but they're sending just regular people, more or less. I should also say regular people because they're not exactly regular people. William Shatner, a famous actor, once Captain Kirk for the famous television series Star Trek, became the oldest person to reach space at age 90. This was a successful flight mission that happened just yesterday. They go right up to the edge of space. They're able to have a little bit of weightlessness, and then they come right back down in about 10 minutes. So imagine just as 10 minutes clocks by you today, this is what they were doing yesterday during a few minute period, floating around, taking a look at Earth, and then they were able to come back down this way, a little bit of a parachute, and they just land into West Texas. So why do we pay attention to this? We pay attention to this for a few different reasons. It's a fascinating story about innovation, number one, but really we're looking at the growing business of space tourism. And as I was thinking more about it today, it's not even just about space tourism, you and me being able to go into space, but also looking at the frontier of space. We think about the Wild West and opportunities that came from the Wild West as America expanded. Well, now we're looking upwards, and what does this frontier provide as far as human revelation, businesses, military expansion, and beyond? There's a lot here to unpack. So this is what happened yesterday. Now, while this was more or less a flawless mission, we're having more difficulty with transportation here on Earth. And I'm sure you're experiencing that in a few different ways. Simple transportation, simple, again, air quotes, trying to get goods from one place to the next. And the president spoke about this yesterday. But before I get to that, I want to talk to you about a headline that you're likely seeing all over the place and you're going to continue to see. A headline that's mentioning high inflation. So high inflation, if someone says that instantly, like we all feel like falling asleep. In economics class, right? Like high inflation, like what? Okay, so anytime you hear high inflation, you instantly have to think, okay, high inflation, that means the value or the purchasing power of my dollar has decreased. So if something is talking about high inflation, your purchasing power is decreasing, which is not a great thing. So think about it in very simple terms. If a dollar bought you a cup of coffee just the other day, higher inflation can lead to a rise in price. So a dollar buys you a cup of coffee. Now $1.50 will buy you a cup of coffee. And suddenly you see prices rising all over the place. And that's something that we're seeing. We're seeing that for several different reasons. And inflation can be caused by several different reasons. So we're just going to focus on a few today. One of the main causes of inflation is that there's just too much money out there, money supply. And again, that becomes difficult to visualize because we're using credit cards and debit cards and Venmo and all of that. But money supply matters. And when there's too much money, when there's too much of anything, the price goes down or the worth of it goes down. And that's how you see inflation pressure. There's a couple other reasons though, that you can see inflation. If there's just too much cash available, if there's too much credit available, if it's too easy for consumers to access it, then what happens is that we have really high demand, right? We're able to buy things and spend and push the economy around a little bit, but there may not be the supplies that catches up with the demand. And then prices also go up, right? Because you have high demand, low supply, and suddenly prices rise. So that's kind of like broad strokes of inflation. Where with the pandemic, we have something else. We have whiplash, right? We saw the economy slow, way down. And then businesses adjusted, we adjusted. There was stimulus added to the economy. There was money pushed into the economy and consumers are back. They're ready to go. But there's a supply issue and there's also a supply chain issue. And there's a question about getting even things like little parts to things. And so that can't keep up with demand. So now we're seeing we're seeing this inflationary period. You want a Goldilocks effect on the economy. You don't want an economy so hot, right? That it's pushing prices higher, your dollar's worth less, and it's overheating. You don't want that. You also don't want the opposite. What you want is just enough. We expect a certain amount of inflation. We expect prices to rise a little bit as the cost of living goes up, but we don't want to see it take off too high. And so what we're seeing is data points, not just 1 month, not just 2 months. We're seeing several months where there's inflationary pressure. And so here's where the White House steps in. The White House announced yesterday that they're going to try to keep these key ports in California open, because part of this economic situation we're in is we can't get enough supplies out to consumers. And one of the reasons we can't do that is we can't unload cargo ships. Why can't we do that? It's a traffic jam. And so the president said that they're working on a deal with the Port of Los Angeles to make sure that the port is staying open 24/7. They're working with major retailers to make sure they're unloading the trucks, as many as possible, so that supplies gets into the US economy. So you're not waiting around, 12 weeks to buy a chair, for example. We want you to be able to buy a chair, right? So this is something that the president stepped in to try to say, we're going to try to free up this part, the supply and demand issue. We're going to try to help that out so that we can hopefully alleviate the pressure on the consumer and this race of prices increasing year over year. Now, how much of an effect this will have is a big question, because it's not just about container ships not being able to offload in California. It's also about having enough truckers to get those, whatever in those containers, wherever they need to go in America. There's about having enough workers at Walmart to unload those trucks, for example. So it's not just as simple as making sure these ports stay open and then our problems are gone. But it does tell us that the White House is concerned about this, that there's a real concern, especially towards the back half of the year. We know we have, Halloween and Thanksgiving and Christmas. This is where we spend. And what the way that the American consumer spends means something for how the year looks, how we're setting up the following year, how businesses are going to think about hiring and structuring and all the like. And it's also impactful for the global economy, because we know that the American consumer is responsible for the economic activity here. We're the largest economy in the world, and so that impacts the global economy overall. So what you should know is that the White House is this is what they're attempting to do, right? Is get these guys to park and unload. That's what they're trying to do. Get anything in these containers off into the shore and get them into shelves near you. Hopefully, when there's more supply, then maybe we'll see prices regulate. That's a big maybe. That's a big maybe. And there's a lot of different dynamics at play. So I just want you to be aware of that. You might be seeing this in stores. We talked about this at the beginning of the week, seeing sometimes random shortages for things. Why are these shelves empty? We had these things last week. And it seems to be very difficult to predict. And so this is a sign the White House is concerned about this. Just overall, because I think this is important, it's very partisan, inflation, whose policies are causing inflation. The big backdrop to this is that we've had a lot of stimulus in the U.S. economy over more than a decade. This really started around the financial crisis. It's continued through Democrat and Republican administrations. You have the Federal Reserve, which is responsible for money supply, with a certain policy that continues to push money supply into the economy. And there's been a big question about when does that reach a tipping point when you hit a major inflationary period, and kind of what the future looks like for monetary policy in America. That's getting into more of the technicalities, but inflation is not just an immediate issue. It is an immediate issue when we're looking at certain policies of stimulus that are immediate and the effects of the pandemic. But there's a broader question about inflation that dates back many, many years, and an economic policy or monetary policy that's continued for some time. So I want you to be aware of that too. If there is a year where we really heed the advice of shopping early, this seems to be a year that we should really consider that. So we're going to have more on this. We're going to talk more about shortages, labor shortages, trucking shortages, supply chain issues overall. I'd be very curious. I'd love to hear, what are you seeing in your grocery store, in your local retailers? Snap a photo, send it to us. Let's put it together, and we'll be able to paint our own picture of what's really happening in America right now. So consider doing that. It's great to see you guys. All these stories and more on smarternews.com. Have a great day.